Hello, this is a short crash course video on the causes and consequences of the Civil War and how it affected America over time. But just before the video starts, I'll start with some disclaimers. 1. I'll be covering topics quickly but concise in order to keep the flow of the video linear and the time to a minimum. And 2. I may not cover all the causes and consequences that contributed to the Civil War, but I'll hit the main ones in order to keep the video relatively short and easy to watch. Now that we got those out of the way, let's jump into it. The first cause was sectionalism. Long before the Civil War even happened, the US was already facing mass sectionalism due to differing political ideologies, stances on certain issues, extreme polarization, and more. An example of mass sectionalism was Congress passing the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act opened up the territories of the new states to popular sovereignty, which allowed public voting on the legalization of slavery in the states. Another example of active sectionalism is the caning of Charles Sumner. This took place in Congress on May 22, 1856, and was a dispute between Preston Brooks and none other than Charles Sumner himself. After Charles Sumner was making remarks about Southern senators and giving a speech on the issue of new slave states, Preston Brooks had enough, and to everyone's surprise began to attack Sumner with his cane, knocking Sumner unconscious. Therefore, the Kansas-Nebraska Act debate and the caning of Charles Sumner began to polarize the country even further, fights breaking out in the Midwest regarding slave laws, senators becoming rash and violent, and seeing the visual and ideological divide in our country leads us to our first consequence, the picking of sides. So with the increased sectionalism of which states should be slave-free and slave-ridden, people began to take their sides, the two sides being the Union, also known as the North, and the Confederacy, the South. This sets us up for the Civil War because without two parties, who's really fighting? The second important cause of the Civil War and America's division was the dilemma regarding state and federal power/authority. While the country was dealing with issues with slavery and the debate over if it should be allowed in the new states, the issue arose as southern states believed that they would be allowed to govern themselves and abide by the rules when it comes to slavery and taxes. However, the Union/the North believed otherwise, and that it is best to have a stronger centralized federal government. And because of this constant debate and differing ideas about how the country and the states should govern themselves, it eventually led to the Union and Confederacy to be completely divided on economics and authority, pushing the cause for each side, wanting to fight and cause the other side to submit and follow the rules that they perceived was right. And lastly, the third cause, which was the economic differences between the North and the South. The North was far more industrialized and had an emphasis on manufacturing and factories. The South was more focused on agricultural progression and the cotton industry. An example of this being seen is with the Tariff of Abominations, which happened in 1828. Essentially, the North began placing higher tariffs on imported goods, which upset the South because they still did rely on the importation of certain materials. The reason the North did this was to encourage people residing in America to buy from their factories. Due to the increased tariffs and unrest from Southerners, they began a movement called the Nullification Crisis, voiding the Tariff Act in place by the North and highlighting the differences and divide between the now Union and Confederacy. This also ties back to the political differences and how each side has a different way of life, leading to different answers for problems and different ideas on what is right and wrong. Eventually, all these issues and conflict between the Southerners and Northerners led to the Civil War, the largest bloodiest battle in American history, leaving behind old issues and creating new ones, affecting civil rights for decades to come, and segregating our society, maybe some would argue even further than before. These issues, such as the Reconstruction of the South and how that would be executed, racial inequality, creation of loopholes in our Constitution and law, and obviously further political conflict. So those were some of the main reasons why the Civil War happened and its effect on our social, political, and economic spheres of our society. I hope you're able to follow along and enjoy my video. Thank you and goodbye.